Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. This week I'm going to be showing you how I paint Crimson Fists. I've been on a bit of a Crimson Fist kick lately, adding a few units to my fledgling force, and I thought I should add the Stern Guard from the new Leviathan box set. We're going to start with the main armour, using an airbrush to get down 2 thin layers of Cantor blue. You can of course use a brush. For the next stage we're going to panel line or recess shade everything. They're basically the same technique. I'm going to use Black Legion, which is a lovely dark one coat black, and this is going to give us some really nice definition. We could go further with this and use something like Leviathan blue, which is another contrast paint, in a glaze to create some dark blue down below. We could also use the airbrush for this, but they're not characters or vehicles, so they don't need quite as much attention. Whilst we're doing the recess shading, I'm also going to base coat all the areas that want to be black, so the weapons casings and the pouches. Next up is our one armor highlight. Using low therm blue, we're going to do a nice clean highlight all the way around all those raised details. This is going to make the armor look really crisp, clean, and it's such a jump, it's going to give a really nice contrast effect. This is almost comic booky, and I really love the way it looks. You don't have to do quite the same thing, you can use Calgar blue for a more desaturated effect if that's what you prefer. Doing the shading and highlighting the armour is the longest individual part of painting any Crimson Fist model, but once it's done, even if you left it as this, it would look amazing. At least, I think so. Once that's done, we're moving on to our next primary colour, which is red. I'm using Corn Red to base coat both hands, because these guys are veterans, and also the tabards and a few lenses here and there. Over this dark blue, you will need 2 thin coats, so take your time and keep it smooth. Using one of our only mixes of this project, we're going to do 50-50 Evil Suns and Corn Red to create a nice gradient on the tabards. Then we'll use pure Evil Sun Scarlet in our first edge highlight. Following that up with Wild Rider Red for our final highlights all over the armour panels, a few of the lenses, and the tabards on those sharpest creases in the cloth. Wild Rider Red straight on top of Corn Red does much the same as our low therm blue layer did earlier to our Cantor blue. It's a really nice, sharp, almost neon effect. Our next base coat is Dark Aluminium, which is a Vallejo air paint, but you can use it with a brush as I am here. This is going to base coat all our metallic areas, so the piping, the tubes, the Aquila on the chest, and all the weapon parts that aren't black. I find on smaller surface areas this covers very well, but if you're doing something a bit larger, you might need 2 coats. It's also quite thin out of the bottle, so mix it together on a dry palette before we use it. Moving swiftly onto parchment, we're going to base coat everything with Steel Legion Drab and follow it up with a layer of Zandri Dust. I've painted parchment in a few different ways over the years, and this is definitely my favourite, just slowly layering up in colours to create a nice aged paper effect. The next step is to add Ushabti Bone in an edge highlight on those sharpest creases. After this is done, we're going to go in with our second and final mix of the day, which is black and brown. Any 2, doesn't matter. I used Wildwood and Black Legion to create a nice lettering effect. I'm using a little stippling technique here to make it look like it's been written on, but you could just do little stripes. The final step is to add a targeted wash of Seraphim Sepia into the darkest areas to make it look a little bit older. Whilst we're on shading, we're going to use Nuln Oil all over every metallic area. Next up, we're going to do a few small details with Barak Nar Burgundy. This is going to be the wax part of the Purity Seals and the rosaries. The next step for both of these is to layer up with Screamer Pink, and you won't see it on camera, but a little highlight of Pink Horror if you like. Then I realised I hadn't recess shaded all the red since I'd painted it, so I went back in with Black Legion again. Back to the metallics for a second, we're going to use Rune Lord Brass on all those marksman motifs and the exposed shell casings in the magazines. We're then going to darken everything down with Seraphim Sepia. With the metallics done, we just have to move on to a few areas that are unique to each model. Specifically the plasma glow on the combi weapon holding guy here. If you'd like to know how to paint plasma in a bit more detail, I have a full video linked in the top right. Essentially all it is though is adding brighter and brighter highlights towards the bottom of the power coil to create a glow effect, and then edge highlighting around it with a slightly darker red to create a lovely looking glow. If you own an airbrush, you can of course also use that, using some red to create a nice glowing effect with thin layers. Another detail unique to one model, I'm going to use Avalanche Sunset for this power cable from the heavy bolter to the backpack. I'm then going to highlight that up with Flash Gits Yellow, but you won't see much of that because my camera was really interested in what my hands looked like. I know, they're blue. Now a quick word on transfers. I'm not going to cover how I put them on in this video, but I picked up a bunch of these old Crimson Fist transfers from eBay a while back. This is because Games Workshop don't seem to support the Crimson Fists and a few other chapters that well anymore. Another example I can think of is White Scars, who have at least a little transfer sheet from their upgrade box, and basically if you're not one of the main chapters that you get in the launch boxes, you're not really that well supported. Now, that's by the by. As you can see, I was just pointing out that the transfers have quite a lot of extra material around them, which you can cut away, but it doesn't necessarily solve the issue I'm about to bring up, and that's that they don't stick very well. Even using a hairdryer, microsole, microset, you're going to see in the next couple of clips that the transfers don't sit very well. If you have any solutions for how to really soften these old decals without ripping them and apply them smoothly, do let me know, because I've achieved a somewhat alright effect by pressing down with tissue and cutting away the excess and using microsole, microset, water and everything, but I haven't quite made it perfect. I considered using these Imperial Fist transfers, but they have a bunch of white in them and painting over them would be a pain. We'll come back to all that. A quick chat on basing, as it's unique to your army. I'll just let you know how I did it. I used Vallejo thick mud, let it dry, and then covered it in wildwood. Whilst the wildwood was drying, I applied all the transfers. Now, the left shoulder we've mentioned the problems with, but the right shoulder there isn't actually anything specific to Crimson Fists. So I took the Ultramarines Veterans symbol, Crimson Fists are Codex compliant, so I can use this, applied it went down nice and easy as it's a newer transfer, and covered it in corn red. Back to the basing, I used Cabalite green to create a few patches of a different colour. I don't know if this is moss or grass, but I know I like the way it looks. Then I base coated all the rocks that they're standing on in Steel Legion drab and edge highlighted with Ushabti bone. Once again, I'm edge highlighting because I think it looks neat, not because you necessarily need to. A dry brush will also work just fine here. And with that, I tied up the base rims with Black Legion. I have a real good time painting my Crimson Fists, and there's definitely going to be a little bit more on the channel in the near future to do with these guys. They're an OG chapter that don't seem to get a huge amount of love from Games Workshop. Anyway, I hope this has helped some of you aspiring sons and daughters of Dawn. I've been Sam. See you next time.